Hey guys, it's Rift here, and today I want to ask you all a question. How many times have you heard the phrase Arkham Combat in the video game landscape? Now, specifically regarding the Spider-Man games, and more specifically, the Insomniac ones. People are very quick to point out that these games leached from the Arkham games. You know, they stole mechanics, they're very similar, and at worst, they're just blatant clones of the Arkham games. And is there any legitimacy to this? Well, that's what we're going to find out in today's video. And since Arkham Batman and Insomniac Spider-Man are the most similar and, notorious for being rivals, I guess, we're going to go over exclusive features for Arkham Combat first and foremost. Building combos is very demanding in this game, and it punishes you for spamming and missing attacks. Building combos unlocks instant takedowns to perform on any enemy, with a variety at your disposal depending on the game, requiring a combo of 8 at base and 5 when leveled up. Combat is free-flowing, with Bruce yeeting himself across the arena to quickly attack the enemy that he's facing. Batman can counter between 1 and 3 enemies at once depending on the game and depending on levels. Arkham Combat is exclusively ground combat, with no air-based combat at all, with a little bit of range thrown in for good measure. Batman's health does not regenerate at all in combat, with him essentially healing partially or, fully healing when a combat scenario has concluded. Batman in every game besides Asylum has 2 separate health bars, one for melee and one for bullet damage, with you needing to upgrade both, respectively. The Arkham games have enemies with attacks that are unblockable, requiring you to dodge them, in addition to having bladed enemies that have specific requirements to evade their attacks. Batman cannot counter nor react to bullets, needing to stun or damage ranged enemies before they attack, or to take cover, or in some instances, damage them and prevent them from picking up firearms to begin with. Batman has quickfire gadgets, examples being the Batclaw, the explosive gel, the remote electric charge, the ice blasts, and of course the batarangs. Essentially, gadgets are tied to button combos for convenience, maintaining the pace of combat. Every Batman enemy has specific counters. For example, the big guys like the Titans, or the big guys, from the militia in Arkham Knight, require you to stun them and for them to perform a beatdown. The stun baton enemies need to be attacked from range or from behind, and the shield enemies need to be stunned and then for you to double tap the dodge button to stun them, locking them on the ground, ready for a takedown. Batman is vulnerable in the Arkham games when performing ground takedowns, adding a little bit of risk/reward to the procedure. Sometimes the knockout strike on an enemy has cinematic conclusions, basically meaning that the final attack in a combo, or the killing blow I guess, sometimes has a cinematic spectacle. During specific set pieces, you can perform dual takedowns and swap between Batman and the supporting character, specifically in Arkham Knight when you can switch between Robin and Batman, or Nightwing and Batman. And in Arkham Knight, you can pick up enemy weapons and use them for bonus damage and bonus efficiency. So as you can see, there are a lot of mechanics that are exclusive to Arkham Combat that don't appear in the Insomniac games. So now let's take a look at features that both games share. Both games have melee combat. Both Spider-Man and Batman have gadgets to assist in combat. Both games have combo systems. Both can react to melee attacks from enemies in combat. Both have a wide array of enemy types to take down. Both have environmental takedowns and interactions with the environment. Both games have alternative characters with their own mechanics. Both games allow you to disarm enemies of their weapons. And both have quicktime events in certain boss fights. So now that we've looked at Arkham Combat as well as the areas that both series share, let's look at features that are exclusive to the Insomniac Spider-Man games, and more specifically, the PS4 Spider-Man game. Combos are very forgiving, and the game does not punish you for spamming melee, with combos only being lost via taking damage or waiting a long time in between attacking enemies. The higher the combo threshold, the more focus you earn, rewarding skilled players. Attacking enemies and dodging attacks builds the focus meter, which unlocks takedowns. Gadgets do not regenerate by themselves in combat, and instead are regenerated by performing finishers. Spider-Man can heal in combat by consuming 1 bar of focus. Spider-Man has 1 health bar that is shared for all forms of damage. Spider-Man can dodge melee and range-based attacks, ranging from throwables to bullets. Spider-Man is a hybrid of ground and aerial combat, with some encounters, such as Electro vs Vulture, taking place exclusively in the air. All takedowns are cinematic and grant immunity frames and safety. Certain enemies are resistant and weak to gadgets. For example, brutes are immune to concussive bursts and trip mines, and the armored Sable units are immune to the normal webbing. Spider-Man has suit powers, which is this game's version of ultimate attacks that are on a long cooldown. There are over 20 of these, ranging from very powerful attacks to providing stat boosts, or hell, changes to the environment. Spider-Man also has up to 3 suit mods, which further allow small or potentially substantial tweaks to aspects of the combat, providing you more health from focus, doing more damage after performing a perfect dodge, or granting improved resilience to melee damage, etc, etc. All of these features that I've listed for both games, as well as the factors that they have in common, are just ones that we were able to brainstorm over the course of one evening. And even with these differences listed, it's pretty obvious that whilst yes, there are a few things in common that both games share, for the most part at least, these combat systems are radically different to such an extent that the things they have in common are far outclassed by the differences that are unique to both game series. And that's not even factoring in the Miles Morales game, which has his own systems regarding his own Venom powers, or hell, all of the features in Spider-Man 2 regarding the symbiote enemies to the symbiote combats. But what really annoys me about this is how people are so quick to just reduce Arkham Combat and all of the very tightly knit systems that weave together to create an unforgettable combat experience. They are prepared to just forget all of that and just limit the Arkham systems to hitting enemies and countering at the right time. Because whilst Insomniac Combat is the most notorious example as something that has Arkham Combat, there are a lot of other examples that have things in common with Arkham, on the surface at least, but when you dive into it, they really couldn't be any more different. Going over a few examples, the Spider-Man 2 movie game, ironically enough, has melee combat. You can counter enemies with the reticle above your head, and you can't heal in combat. It has a couple of things in common with Arkham, yet besides those aspects, you'd be hard-pressed to find things that those games have in common. A more obscure example is Ben 10 Ultimate Alien Cosmic Destruction. I mean, it has melee combat, you can counter enemies with the reticle above their heads, it's free-flowing, and you cannot counter ranged attacks. But again, this game is completely different due to its own unique mechanics of transforming into 10 different aliens with their own strengths and weaknesses, yet it still somehow gets the label of Arkham Combat. I didn't know that you could transform into different aliens in the Arkham games. Ironically enough, the Amazing Spider-Man 1 game also has a lot in common with Arkham. It has melee combat, you can dodge enemies with the prompts, it has environmental finishers and interaction with the environment, and you also have finishers to downed enemies. I'm sure you're seeing a pattern here. Whilst this game has a couple of elements in common with the Arkham games, besides that, it has more in common with past Spider-Man games. A more recent example would be something like Another Crab's Treasure. I mean, it has melee combat, you can counter enemy attacks with the prompts above their heads, it has unblockable attacks, forcing you to dodge them, and it has environmental interaction. Yet again, you'd be foolish for saying that this is Arkham Combat, since the fundamental blueprints of this game is that of a Souls-like. Yet ironically enough, it has its own standout features to prevent it from being a Souls clone, whilst also having a couple of basic similarities with Arkham Combat. If you wanted an example of games that I would say come very close to being that of Arkham Combat, then I would say Sleeping Dogs is a good example, same with Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and maybe Middle-earth Shadow of Mordor. But even then, those games have glaring differences that prevent them from being 100% Arkham Combat. They are free-flowing, they have countering attacks, and they have, their own specific, ties to the Arkham Combat. But at the same time, they do have their own unique differences. And I feel as though a similar principle applies to the Insomniac games, where they have their own unique flares and unique, features to the combat, that people don't talk about it, and instead they just ignore it and try saying, oh, it's just Arkham Combat, which I think is very unfair, since they only borrow a small amount from the Arkham games, and they don't borrow the actual, things that are intrinsically tied to Arkham Combat. So coming back to the topic of this video and acting as a conclusion of sorts, it's pretty clear at least that the Insomniac Spider-Man games definitely do not have Arkham Combat. Yes, they have similarities between both games, there's bound to be, but at the same time, those similarities are far outclassed by the differences, and all of those differences I mentioned for the Spider-Man games was primarily just the PS4 game, not even going into all of the new things in the Miles Morales sequel, and especially barely scratching the surface talking about the things exclusive to Spider-Man 2. But anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you like this topic, feel free to subscribe to the channel, join the Discord server down below, and comment below what you think on this subject matter. Likewise, if you want to join streams in the future, that would also be appreciated as well. Thanks guys, and I'll see you all in the next one.